Good evening and welcome to the City of Dublin Board of Zoning Appeals of Thursday, October 27, 2022. You can join the meeting in person at 5555 Perimeter Drive and also access the meeting via the live stream on the city's website. We welcome public participation, including public comments on cases. The meeting procedure for the case this evening will begin with staff presentation, followed by an opportunity for the applicant to make a presentation. Board will then have an opportunity to ask clarifying questions of staff and then the applicant and hear any public comment. We ask that all public comment be provided at the podium and each speaker provide their name, address for the record. Following any public comment, the board will enter into deliberations of the case prior to rendering a decision. Lori, will you please call the roll for this evening?
Mr. Deschler?
Here.
Mr. Nye?
Here.
Mr. Clower?
Here.
Mr. Murphy?
Here.
Mr. Garvin?
We're going to move for the acceptance of documents and approval of meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to accept the documents into record and approve the minutes of September 22, 2022?
So moved. Second.
Roll, please.
Mr. Garvin?
I'll abstain if I will.
Mr. Nye?
Yes.
Mr. Deschler?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Mr. Clower?
Yes.
With regard to the joint session held with Council, Board of Zoning Appeals, Planning and Zoning Commission, and the Architectural Review Board, do we have a motion to accept those documents into the record, which meeting took place on August 31, 2022?
I so move.
Second, please. Roll, please.
Mr. Deschler?
Yes.
Mr. Clower?
Yes.
Mr. Garvin?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Mr. Nye?
Yes.
Mr. Deschler? I already called.
I think you already got me.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go for the swearing of the witnesses and the staff. If anyone is going to be presenting, testifying in front of this board this evening, will you please stand and raise your right hand? Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth with regard to your statements and testimony made to the board this evening? And let's see, new update. We did have two cases this evening, but one of the cases, which was case number 22-131V, the E residence at 6056 Bridges Close Drive, has requested their case be tabled for a future meeting. So we'll need a motion for that tabling.
I move to table case 22-131V to a later meeting. Second.
Roll, please.
Mr. Deschler?
Yes.
Mr. Nye?
Yes.
Mr. Clower?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Mr. Garvin?
Yes.
I think we're going to have a quick comment from our legal advisor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to be with you all again this month. Just wanted to remind you, I think we're going to hear some presentations from staff this evening about potential updates that are being considered to the solar panel code by the Planning Commission and City Council. Just a reminder that those aren't law yet. That's to be considered by City Council. What the focus of tonight's meeting needs to be is on the criteria in the code that you all applied last month, same as it has been over the past year. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And then we have some staff comments with regard to meetings relative to solar panels?
Yeah, excuse me. My comments are based on materials that the board has asked in relationship to questions that arose at the last meeting. The first was a spreadsheet that indicates all of the permits that have been issued from our building department in terms of solar panels and where those locations are and how that got approved. We've subsequently been getting information about several locations that don't have permits, so we'll be pursuing information about those permits. And then the second set of information I wanted to let the board know, because this is a topic that's encompassing many aspects of the city right now, including just private meetings with HOAs, just the efforts that the city's been making to try to communicate to the public as best possible of what our objectives are and to discuss this code modification that Jesse just mentioned that is moving its way through the process. I'll start with that. That actually was presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission last Thursday. And the Planning Commission gave us very direct feedback as to our code language. And this is actual code language that we would adopt in the zoning code. And so they were very clear on what they wanted to see and how to make that amendment move forward. That does move forward to City Council in a minimum of 2 readings, the first of which will be in November and the second is anticipated for December. So again, trying to be efficient with our time, but make sure that the code modification states exactly what Planning and Zoning Commission requests, what we're hearing from HOAs throughout these efforts, and then equally what City Council would prefer. So again, that's moving forward tentatively by the end of the year. And again, I think we talked about this at the last meeting. We have, our communications team has sent information to individual HOAs about, specifically about Senate Bill 61, to give them any type of assistance that they might need for that conversation. And then our communications team are, not only our planning division, but all of our directors attended an annual HOA meeting, and this was a specific topic that was discussed at that meeting. So just to know that the efforts are ongoing, there's multiple aspects to this communication strategy, and that there is the code modification that's moving forward. So I just want to make sure I'm answering all of your questions before we proceed into tonight's presentation.
Thank you, Tammy. With regard to our one case this evening, it is a tabled case from last month, the Wadsworth residence at 6240 Post Road. That's case number 22-130V, non-use area variance. For clarity and as a reminder, this is an application for a variance to allow solar panels as an accessory structure to be located on a street-facing facade on a 1.32 acre site zoned as a planned unit development district, Indian Run Meadows. More clarity, the site is located 250 feet northwest of the intersection of Post Road with Holt Drive. Our staff this evening for case presentation is Zach Hounshell. Zach.
Thank you very much. Well, good evening. Again, this is a tabled case from the September BZA meeting for a non-use area variance for solar panels for the Wadsworth residents. I'll go through the information that we went through last time, as we do have a new member here tonight who was not present, but it will be more of a summary of what was presented last time as well. So the site is highlighted in yellow on the screen. This site is zoned R1. It is located north of Post Road. This is a 1.32 acre site and just does house a single family home. There is mature vegetation to the north of the site, but there is also a row of mature evergreen trees which run along Post Road, which is then split by the driveway going into the home. And this is just to show you some of the existing conditions as you look towards the front facade of the home from Post Road. So Tammy did a great job of explaining kind of where this process currently is, but to go over where we are at the moment, right now. So residential solar panels are currently not listed in our zoning code as a specific use when they are building mounted for both residential and commercial. The only areas where they are contemplated are our West Innovation District, Bridge Street District, and Dublin Corporate Area Plan. That in large part is because they are newer within the last 10 to 15 years, newer code amendments, so those considerations have been made and are included in those areas. For areas that are not included in those three districts, the city utilizes the accessory structures section of code to regulate accessory structures and to regulate building mounted solar panels. So with that, the third point explains kind of where accessory structures are required to be located. This is not just for solar panels, but all accessory structures within the city. They're required to be constructed within the buildable area, behind all applicable setback lines, and to the rear or side of a principal structure. So the request tonight is for a variance to the location of the solar panels to be located on the front facade of the building. This is the south-facing facade of the home, which does face out onto Post Road. So the variance would be to 153-074-B6A, which speaks towards accessory structures required to be located to the side or rear of the home. There are 31 panels located in total on the south-facing roof face, which are shown on the photo on the screen. To summarize, staff has reviewed this variance request to the applicable criteria required for each of our variances within the city. The three criteria that are shown on the screen are required to be met for a variance to be approved. Staff has reviewed and has, based on our review, have found that all three criteria are not met. This is in large part due to the condition, specifically for special conditions, that the condition of the home being a south-facing front roof facade is not unique to this site and is seen in sites adjacent to this site. Additionally, this is a request that's necessitated by the applicant, and the request to have accessory structures forward of the building does impair the intent for accessory structures. Two of the four on the screen are required to be met for a variance to be approved, as well as the three previous. Staff has found that two of the four are met, which are number 1 and 3, the special privileges and delivery of governmental services. With that, due to staff's review of the application against the criteria for a variance, staff is recommending disapproval of the non-use area variance to allow the solar panels on the front facade of the building. With that, I am more than happy to answer any questions you may have. Otherwise, our applicant, Mr. Wadsworth, is here to address your questions, concerns. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for staff?
So with regards to special conditions, I believe you categorized it under, does the applicant's house sit far enough back from the street that these wouldn't be visible, or is it still visible from the street or to other neighbors?
So the setback of the home, I can pull that up for you. Like I said, there is a row of mature evergreens that does screen a good portion of the home along the front.
Right, I see that overhead here. And that is what I'm asking. I wonder if that's effective from other angles. I mean, obviously it looks like it blocks most of the view, but hard to tell how high the trees are.
Hey, you're going to have your opportunity to speak because you're not on the record by what you're saying. So I want to make sure we'll wait when you have your application, or as an applicant, you'll be able to have an opportunity to speak. We'll let staff answer the questions, and then for any clarifying piece, we'll have you for your presentation. Thank you.
The setback from Post Road to the front of the home is about 120 feet.
And is this photo taken from Post Road?
This is taken from Post Road, looking from the southeast corner of the site. So this is the best view you would have of the house,
Right,
as you're coming down Post Road.
with the driveway there opening it up. Okay, thanks.
Dan, any other questions?
Nothing else from me.
Any other questions for staff? Good. Okay. Mr. Wadsworth, would you care to come up? Thank you. And if you want to turn the mic on, that'd be great.
That one? All right. I was simply going to answer that question, yes. But the
Mr. Wadsworth, before you get started, could
Kevin-
you state your name and
Yes.
address for the record?
Kevin
Thank you.
Wadsworth, 6240 Post Road, the homeowner at with my wife at that house. The shot there you saw from the end of the driveway is really the only place you can see the house from the road or from the other side of the street. The trees are 30 plus feet tall. They're so fully screened. Also, line of trees on the east side of the property as well. So my neighbors to the east who are here tonight, actually, again, well screened as well. There are no trees to the west particularly, so you can see the house from the neighbors there to the west. It's about the only place you can see a roof. Otherwise, reiterating what we said last night, I think our house it meets some of the unique conditions that we are a south-facing house. So that is roughly 25% probably of the houses in Dublin.
I'm so sorry. What did you just say?
I said our house is south-facing, which we just covered this in detail last time. That basically, the only economical place to put a solar panel is on the south-facing side of a roof. We talked. They'd asked questions a little bit about ground mount. Ground mount is more expensive and less efficient. By the application of what they're saying the current code is, we could potentially put them behind our house or to the west of our house. And those are more expensive and less efficient, don't negate the purpose of the solar panel. Our house is on, as I mentioned last time, on septic system. So our entire front yard is our leach bed of our septic system. So we can't plant any shade trees there. That helps us from solar, as it makes us a perfect candidate for a solar roof on the house. Also, but it necessitates pretty high electric bills because we have no shading of the house. So we have a lot of solar gain on the house. So our electric bills are quite high, particularly in the summer when the sun's shining and it's hot. So we're good candidates from that perspective, and that is something that I think that sets us apart from other places in Dublin. And in addition to the setback from the road, we're not in a neighborhood. We're not anything of that nature. I mentioned this before. I even pull up the permit again. When I first was interviewing companies for this, I hired EcoHouse Solar to do this work. They gave me references. One of the references was on Terra Hill, just a block north of us. 50. What was the number of that house? 57 something, I believe. And they had a solar system installed on the south street-facing side of their roof in 2021. So, and that was actually permitted by Dublin. I know she said they asked a question. They've given you a spreadsheet since then. So the code has not changed since 2021 to now. Merely the interpretation of the application of the code has. So, and I'm not a lawyer here. I'm an engineer, but my opinion, part of the appeals process would be to look at where code is kind of being, in my mind, nonsensically applied. We talked about this a little last time that you said, oh, it would be legal for me to put a shed in the west side of my yard and to put solar panels on the roof of that shed. That would be legal under the current code, but not to put them on my house. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't see a reason why this code is being put in that fashion, aside from the fact that we can. We decided sometime in 2022 that we don't like these, so we're going to apply this code that doesn't really fit and put it on. And I think that in and of itself is a reasonable justification for a variance to that piece of code.
Yeah, just a point of clarification. I'm not certain the applicant's representations are accurate with regard to the code application. Tammy, do you want to clarify that just for the record, please?
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate how this must appear from the public. So in our current code, again, like Zach said, exclusive of the 3 areas that we mentioned, solar panels are not a permitted use. They're not a use that's allowed in the zoning code. So if we were to apply the zoning code today, we could say the solar panels can't be anywhere. So of course, that's not the stance we wanted to take. We wanted to give some opportunities where we could under the current code. And so we looked at the accessory structure section as a temporary relief to at least be allowing some permits to get issued until we can get the code updated. So I hope that at least gives some solace to this explanation.
I would counter that to say I'm not a lawyer. Again, I know there are some here. I consulted with a lawyer about this, and his statement was simply that, hey, basically, if it's not in the code, it's allowed. Not, and the staff seems to be taking the opposite, saying the complete opposite of that. That if it's not in the code, it's disallowed. And again, the lawyer I consulted with said, yeah, solar is not mentioned anywhere in the code, therefore, you should be allowed to put solar on. And now, so we've applied to put it in the code. We've applied this accessory, and again, I'm not a legal scholar to know which of those two layers is correct on that statement. Again, I would point out that 5676 Terra Hill Drive applied for two different permits, a permit to put solar on and a separate electrical permit to tie in that system in 2021 when the code was the same. It was allowed.
Yeah, I think there was, I completely understand. I know we kind of touched on this last time and we're happy to revisit it. My understanding was the city made a determination potentially at some point in time after maybe that I don't know that address. Kim, you can provide some clarification, please.
So the essence of the conversation is that before we were able to make a consolidated decision with our building division that solar panels would be reviewed as an accessory use / structure, they had different interpretations, and quite frankly, they issued permits under different interpretations, and that's why we stepped in and said, we're going to review them under this section of the code. We'll be consistent until we can get a code modification in place. So we understand that this is not ideal, and just working towards a solution.
Did you want to comment on it? Do you have anything else to add before I offer up questions?
No,
Okay. Does
no.
anybody have a
Happy to
question
answer any questions.
for the applicant?
No, I don't believe so.
Robin, good? Okay, we'll bring you back up if we have any questions while we deliberate. Okay.
Thank you.
Do we have any public comment?
Do not?
Okay. Any public comment from any individuals attending? Okay. Well, we can start talking about this. I'm not sure, Dan, why don't we start with you since you weren't here before? Perhaps we can add or clarify anything for you.
Sure. So I'm not sure what clarification I need at this point. It's clear that to the applicant's point, we don't have probably the appropriate language in place right now. And as Tammy mentioned, I think that's being expedited, that we're going through that process. My reading of it at this point is that it would have to meet, all three of the criteria from the first section. My thought is that it doesn't. I think that the closest is the special exception around your home. The fact that it's set back, that it's partially blocked or largely blocked from view. And I can appreciate the energy bills, but my thought is that it doesn't meet the other two qualifications for criteria, even if it does meet that one. I would think that, hopefully we've got clarification forthcoming, but in terms of approving a variance, I think I'd be reluctant to do that here.
Can I lay out the arguments that I made for action and inaction and substantial adverse effect last time?
Please.
So the action and inaction is something that we've talked about in the past previously. And it's, for instance, if somebody wants to build a shed in their backyard, it's not the fact that they're building the shed in their backyard that would be a problem, or in their side yard or whatever. It's the fact that they are choosing to build it in that location, and that location is the thing that's causing the problem. So for instance, if the only place to build a shed in your property is forward of the house because there's a steep gradient on the backside, and there's no way that you could build a shed on that steep gradient, it's not the fact that you want to build a shed that's the problem. It's the fact that the only place that you could possibly build a shed is on the front of the house. And in those cases, we've decided it's not action/inaction. It's not the fact that they were building the shed. It's the fact that it was in the different location. They didn't choose the fact that their house had a steep gradient in the backyard. They didn't choose the layout of the site or anything like that. And so it's not their action of wanting to build a shed that is the problem. And so we've ruled in previous cases in favor of the property owners on that behalf. So applying it to the solar panel, it was not their action of building the solar panels that's the problem, which is what staff is presenting. It's the fact that they're building the solar panels on the south-facing side of the house. However, it wasn't their option to have chosen to build the house in the south or with the roof facing the south. It wasn't their action or inaction that caused the sun to be significantly stronger on that side of the house. So kind of the other option for action and inaction is there any other way that they could build this? And we heard last time from solar companies that they do not build on the north side of houses and that they don't build on, for residential solar, they don't build ground mounted solar panels. So the only way that the resident could achieve this effect of wanting to build solar panels, which is not the action we care about, it's building the solar panels on the front of the house, is through this method. So based on previous findings, I would say that it is not the resident's fault. And so this action and inaction does not apply.
I think that argument makes a lot of sense. When we see variances due to the shed, maybe, in your example, due to the steep terrain, I think sometimes we're looking for alternatives rather than saying, okay, put it in front of the house. I think initially the reaction is to find something that comes as close to meeting the standards as possible. So, I would agree that it's not necessarily their action or inaction, but I think that the effectiveness of the positioning of the solar panels is a bit of a gray area, but rather than black and white. I think that you've got degrees of effectiveness, probably depending on where you're locating them. And so in that sense, when you can say two sides or the back, I realize that the one direction is going to be most effective. Probably the opposite of that would be least effective. You wouldn't need a variance, though, it looks like, in my reading of this, to have them on the sides in the first place. So
That's correct. We did hear last time, again, from various solar companies that said either they straight up do not do it on the north side of the house because it's not financially feasible. The return on investment is not at all there, so they don't even bother with it. And add on to the fact that snow melt in the winter months, the snow doesn't melt off the solar panels on the north side facing the house because the sun's not hitting it nearly as strongly. And what that does is it adds a cumulative effect of the snow on the panels. So it's not just that you're not getting the efficient or the effectiveness of the solar panels during the winter month, it's that you're actually accumulating snow on the north side of the house, and that can fall down in large clumps.
If you'd like, I could clarify that number again. There's modeling software out there from the government, the National NREL labs that can model sunlight. And for Dublin, my house particular, which faces 178 degrees south, the difference between incident sun on the north side of my house and the south side of the house is a factor of 5. So again, like for me, it works down to dollars per kilowatt hour. It costs the same to install a panel on the north side as the south side. So over the 25-year life that the panels are guaranteed, a solar panel on the south side produces electricity at about 7 cents a kilowatt hour, compared to paying 14.5 cents with AEP today. So that's my incentive to do this. On the north side of the house, it'd be 35 cents a kilowatt hour. So nonsensical compared to
takes you to the other side. Can you tell me on the sides of the home what the
I don't. Well, my house is a single gable with north-south gable, so there really isn't a side of the house that I could put panels on. So you get a little bit on the garage there. You could probably fit 4 or 5 panels on.
Right, smaller pitches.
So.
And I know you guys discussed the appurtenance or kind of a separate structure for the solar panels. I know you said it's not cost effective.
Well, I mean, a ground mount is not cost. A ground mount are more expensive. Really, honestly, nobody's ever come up with why do we not want to do this, but the only assumption I can come up with is that someone somewhere thinks this is an eyesore, is why we wouldn't want to do it.
And I don't.
And I would say a ground mount panel. If that's I disagree with that take, but even if you agreed with that, I think a ground mount is going to be far more of an eyesore than a roof mounted system is. So I wouldn't want to do it from that perspective to potentially affect my neighbors and that way. Also, much more, and it's more difficult to mow around and things of that nature as well. So,
okay.
Any other comments on the second point?
So I might be able to add a little commentary. In terms of, I have 2 points to make. In terms of the action and inaction, I don't know if this is an equivalent scenario, but let's take the scenario where someone has a house and they have a front-loaded garage. And because of that, the design of the house, that front-loaded garage pushes their house back to basically their rear yard setback. And so we've had a lot of requests that have come before the board where they want to do something in that rear space, but because of the design of the house, they can't do anything. So as part of that analysis, we've said, were you the original owner that designed that house? And if so, you've contributed to this factor, perhaps unknowingly, but you've contributed to that factor. And that's been, we've treated those scenarios completely differently. If you were not the property owner that designed that house, you're not creating, it's not an action or inaction of yourself. And then the opposite would be true. So I would say that I would point that out. And then the second thing that I would say is I've done a lot of research, more so for the code update itself. And I've talked to a lot of companies, including I think the company that you're dealing with, which they've been very helpful. It is true that some companies at some threshold will not put solar panels in certain locations. There are other companies that will take more liberties. So it's not a blanket statement of all companies will not. There's a economic threshold of when they make that decision. And the companies are different. I've talked to some companies that say we won't do X, Y, or Z, and other companies that are basically taking anything into consideration. So it seems to be not quite as cut and dry as saying that they won't do it. So that's just from my analysis and the people that the companies that I've talked to. And I've tried to really pick and choose the companies that I'm talking to, smaller companies, larger companies, companies that might have different products that they sell. I've really tried to make it a holistic conversation. So that's just what I found.
If I may, thank you.
I would say that the won't, again, comes down to the finances and the money. I'm sure any company, it doesn't make financial sense, but if you pay them enough money, they're happy to do the work, right? So
Appreciate that. I think the one issue here is that there is a pretty clear measurable return on investment in this case, and there's not always with these kind of projects, right? Maybe you want to, we dealt with a fire pit, right? And ultimately the way that they'd have to build the fire pit without the variance is going to be more expensive, right? And so I think we can't take the economic factor into this. The idea that, as I kind of alluded to, I don't think it's a black or white issue on whether or not the solar panels can be done or not done. It's more of an economic issue. Where does it make sense for you to make that investment, and what's your time horizon for it? My thought is that there are other options that are less effective economically. And so I'm having trouble kind of separating, is that economic hindrance something that's under our purview? Because that would be, a great argument for you, but I don't know that it necessarily is your only option, to have the most economically viable station for the panels.
sure. The other option, the second most economic option is to do nothing, which is obviously what I've done for the last 20 years of living in the house, is just tie into AP and pay an electric bill. But we had our roof replaced this past summer due to wind damage on the roof. So having a new roof, that seemed like I'd done the research into the economics of solar, seemed like a good time to do that. It is different than a fire pit or shed. A fire pit, nobody's building a fire pit because they're going to start a hot dog roasting business or something and make money. They're doing it because they want it in their house, and it's nice. That's not the case for the solar panels. I'm not, some people might want it for the, I guess, environmentally friendliness or something. That's a nice bonus, but the main driver is just cheaper electricity. So again, I think you'll see in 5 or 10 years, people like me, I would never have guessed that it made sense in Ohio. I would have said, sure, if you live in Arizona or something like that, until I started doing the research and I realized, oh, it is. So my guess is in 5 or 10 years, as people replace roofs and do the research for themselves, you'll see more of these.
I'd imagine that's probably true. So I guess if you were to put, we looked at the house, obviously, the side facing pitches are much more limited than the front and back. I mean, I know we don't have the numbers around it, but if you were able to put panels there and they were to offset some of the cost, obviously in that scenario, it would still make sense. It wouldn't, replace your energy bill. But if they were more effective than your 17-cent, or I'm sorry, 14, 17 cents kilowatt hour, then it would reduce that cost. I guess what I'm getting at there is that it's not all or nothing. It's just whether or not we can meet the criteria to have you put them in this optimal position.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm not far enough on the special circumstances, because even though you're set back and even though your heating bill's higher, I think that I guess a combination of the first and third criteria, that it still does have an effect in terms of, the same way it affects every other house that could be applying for this variance, in that, people could see it placed in the front, whereas traditionally our criteria say that it's got to be in the back and side. And so even
Traditionally, as of the last 12 months, we should again clarifying that. And prior to 2021,
regards to the Terra Hill property, you mean?
yes, and others. We talked about others last time. One Hawks Nest or several. Or, again, apparently you have a spreadsheet now. I don't have a spreadsheet.
And it sounds like, if I understand correctly, maybe this is for Tammy, if that Terra Hill property were to apply for these solar panels now, we might be in a similar situation where they'd have to achieve a variance.
That's true, yes.
So we're in a weird position in timing where, there's a group that's grandfathered in. You've come kind of in the process where they've taken note and decided to address the solar panels on the south facing, on street sides, I should say. But we haven't solidified the code on that. And so it is, obviously an issue of timing in that regard for you.
Mm-hmm.
There is a representative from the solar company here. I didn't see her swear in when she started, but I don't know if she's wanting to give input as well into this discussion. So,
Well, we can finish our questions and our deliberation to the extent we want to bring her up, or we can do that at that time.
So just to drill down a little bit more on the impair the intent and purpose, I guess, how do you feel that it meets that requirement, that it doesn't impair the intent and purpose of the code?
Is that the third criterion? That's what we talked about that a little. Again, being a non-lawyer, I struggle with exactly what that wording means.
Sure. So my thought,
because if your argument is, again, like just I'll say, if your argument is that, like, hey, they impact your neighbor's property value, or this, or you can install somewhere else, there's an answer to that. If you say you can't do that, and my argument is, yeah, you said you can't. I can't. If the only reason you have is because I said so, then there's not a lot of counter argument to that. Yeah, you said so. I mean, your reasoning might be flawed, but if you said so, you said so. And that's sort of what number 3 realized. Like, hey, we wrote a code that says you can't do this. How did our code not say that? And I present the argument. I think the code clearly doesn't say that. Again, I could put a shed next to my house. I could put solar panels on that shed. That has far more of an impact on my neighbors, on my property value on the street than putting them on my own roof does, where they're black panels on a dark roof. You wouldn't even, I've driven past a house on Terra Hill 100 times and never noticed it had solar panels until the representative told me. So the fact, again, I think that's where I would put number 3, the intent of the code. I think clearly the intent of the code was not there to prevent solar panels on it, given that I could put them on a shed in my house, given that our neighbors have them. I think that's where I would say number 3, we meet the criteria for 3.
My thought is that's where you run into the timing issue, because I think that the intent of the requirement is to keep the street facing homes without anything that, and that is a taste matter, but something that could be considered distracting or out of uniformity with the rest of the neighborhood, and maybe be, like, say, an eyesore or something that would detract from the visual element of the neighborhood. And so, you say, well, how can you ever have a case where you don't impair that intent because you've got it in the code? I think that's what the idea behind a variance is, that it's something maybe we hadn't thought of. Maybe, this could be put into that category as something that wasn't thought of at some point. But at this point, we're operating under the idea that it is considered a non-use structure. And if the intent is to keep these things that could bring you out of uniformity or could be distracting away from the street facing side, it's hard for me to understand how you'd have that criteria met. I get the frustration behind it, but right now as we sit, that is the code is saying this is non-use we don't have them on the street facing side.
Would you like to
And-
hear my argument on this one again?
Sure, please.
That it will not cause a substantial adverse effect on the property or improvements in the vicinity, or will not materially impair the intent and purposes of the requirement being varied. To me, that means substantial adverse effect means we don't want people building swimming pools or sheds in their front lawn where it's going to be hideous and going to be really ugly and cause the property value to drop. And I think you'd agree with that, right?
Yeah, well, I absolutely think that that's something that that these requirements would be intended to stop. But I think you're in a matter of taste there. If you say,
Right.
well, those are too far.
In
this is
a 2019 study done by Zillow, they found that adding solar panels to the house raised houses prices by 4.1%.
that
And
would
that,
make sense for the house being sold, obviously, because of the
And-
economic value.
right, and that by raising the house of, or the value of that particular house, it raised the comps in the neighborhood. And so because this house sold for more expensive, that does kind of bring up all the other houses in the neighborhood because they're able to see that, oh, this house sold for more money than we thought it was going to be worth because it added these solar panels. So it's not
Did
necessarily.
those homes on Zillow have the same code as this one?
Uh,
Because I'm not understanding the relevance of that. A Zillow study of the entire United States what does that have to do with there being a special condition met under the Dublin City Code?
Well, it's intent and purposes of the requirement, that it's not creating a substantial adverse effect if it's raising the property values as a whole in the US, and raising the property values for surrounding houses based on comps, then I don't see how that could be a substantial adverse effect.
I think that's assuming that the only reason for the code is to affect property values. I think it's something that Dan said earlier. It could be people don't like looking at them. Don't think it's a personal preference, but I think if you're only looking at property values, I think that makes sense. But I don't read the code to say the variance would directly impact the requirements, the intent for property values. I think that's trying to stretch it to a place you want it to go. What I guess I would say is, I've heard your comments where you're at on 1 and 3. I'll tell you, I'm still in the same place exactly as you are. I have the same problems you have. I don't know if you do, Jason, but I think it's fair for us at this point to just at least let the applicant know that Dan, it sounds like you're a no still, right?
At this point, I'm still not over the third criteria, and I'm not all the way there on the first criteria. I think the second one, I think Robin, you made great points on that. That's still tough for me to say I'm concretely on board there, and so cumulatively, yeah, I'm leaning no at this point.
So am I.
Patrick, did you have any comment or questions?
I may have had some a little while ago. I mean, I guess to that point about the substantial adverse effect, I think the only thing that we would be talking about would be the aesthetics of the neighborhood that would be affected by the solar panels. And yeah, that really does just kind of come down to a matter of taste. Even if you factor in the Zillow study and the added value to the home from the panels, I mean, we're kind of back to this question of, you know, what the benefit is, how substantial or adverse it would be to the overall aesthetics of the neighborhood. And if you're the only home that has these solar panels, which if you're granting a variance, that would be the case without some sort of legislative change, that's going to remain a question that gets factored in. Then we have the second prong, second half of that, section 3, where whether it will materially impair the intent and purpose of the requirement being varied. And I mean, that's kind of my sticking point here, because we've sort of had so much difficulty fitting solar panels into this, calling them accessories and bringing them in here just so that we could have this discussion to begin with. So I'm not as tied to that one. I'm not as persuaded by that one, because it doesn't perfectly contour to the law that we the facts and circumstances don't necessarily contour perfectly with the law that we're asked to consider here. So, I mean, to that degree, I think, you know, when it comes down to a question of taste and stuff, and when we see enough progress from significantly more progress than we've seen at our last meeting with regard to the city council and their steps moving forward. I'm not as inclined to make this decision for one specific home when we have the possibility of, when we're talking about aesthetics, when we're talking about neighborhoods and diminishing use and that sort of thing. If we have a broader sort of standard that we can go by, and that appears to be where the momentum is right now, then, I mean, that appears to be, that's kind of where I am. I've sort of, I sat on this one for a little while. A little softened a little bit on it, especially in light of the new information that we have with regard to the progress we're seeing with city council. So I'm not as hot on granting a variance at this point right now, mostly due to just the language and lack of contours, and it's an imperfect match at this point. So I'm leaning a little less in that direction at this point.
So I'm just to be clear, from a discussion standpoint, are you a no at this point? Just make sure I'm clear.
At this point, I'm leaning in that direction without more compelling evidence to the contrary.
Okay. I mean, I'll speak briefly here. I'm going to stand in the same position I had. I don't think that the house facing south is a special condition. And if you look at the factors under 153.231, that's capital H, 2, little a, 1, capital A through C, none of the lists of what's there qualifies the property to satisfy the special condition requirements. Again, this is something I said last month, and I'll say it again. It just doesn't meet the standard based on the code that we're obligated to interpret. So it sounds like you got 4 no's, 1 yes at this point. I do want to check with Jesse on something, though. We had somebody that didn't come up for the public comment when it was time. It looks as if they may want to state something.
I think that would be fine as long as we swear them in.
Okay.
It'd be best to err on the side of letting everybody in.
You want to give me a thumbs up? Is that a yes? You want to come up? All right. So why don't you stand real quick? Let me swear you in, if you would. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony to this board? Okay. Mr. Wadsworth, you step aside and we can have some public comment. Again, name and address, please, for the record.
Hi, I'm Jillian Dyer. I'm just going to give you the company address. I'm with Eco House Solar. It's 1809 O'Brien Drive in Columbus. And I didn't get up in the public comment because I was, you guys had said some things after that I just wanted to respond to directly. There may be companies that do install on the north side. However, one of the largest solar companies in the country just went out of business. They had a reputation for doing cheap installs that were not necessarily done up to code and did not always get permits for them. And it's been a sticking point in the industry. And Dave Yost, the Ohio Attorney General, has actually filed an injunction to not allow them to ever do business in the state of Ohio again. That would have been, off the top of my head, one of the only companies that I know for sure would just build wherever, whatever you want. And there are also multiple class action lawsuits against them. So I think we had talked about this last time, that just because you can doesn't mean that you should. So most of the solar companies, the major ones in central Ohio, won't install on the north side. And as far as a ground mount goes, there is that septic system on the property. We have not looked at where that is. Typically, installing a ground mount would require trenching, which you can't do over a septic tank. And then there's going to be specific requirements for how deep the wires need to be buried. We don't know. It's possible you could go around it. But it would be likely that the array would have to be a lot bigger to meet the electrical usage in the house. And we don't know with the setbacks on the side and rear of the property, how we would be able to angle that and fit it into that yard, because it is kind of a long and narrow property. And then just a couple of other points. I don't know that it's reasonable to expect somebody when they build or move to a property to know that they need to adhere to a code that isn't written for a technology that was not available at the time that they moved in. Household solar was not, I don't remember exactly when they moved to that property, but yeah, it's only been in the last 10 years that it's really been affordable for most homeowners, and efficient enough to put on a single roof on a house. And also, just to touch on the point that the process is maybe being accelerated, there's still no guarantee that the new code won't require a variance. We just don't know how they're going to go. They may say no solar on the front of the house without a variance, and then we'd be right back here. So just wanted to put that out.
So when you're talking about the ground mount, you said you're not sure how you'd be able to angle it. It would take a much larger array. Does it just get less sun from there? Is it blocked by trees or something else?
It's possible, yeah. There's all the trees. It's, I think the way that you would want to position it would be almost due south. I don't know that there would be room next to the house or behind it without it being shaded by the house or the trees.
Okay. And then as far as the no guarantee of what the new code says, I mean, because you're right, would that give them an opportunity to request a new variance after new code? Or if code was updated, would they be able to come back in? And
Most likely, yes. There's a provision in here that you have to wait a year for a variance unless there's a substantive change to the material that you were requesting a variance for. And in all likelihood, I haven't seen the final version yet. I'm not sure, but it seems to me as if that would open up the path for a new variance within the year.
Okay. So there's some possibility that
Yes.
that going through to the ruling here wouldn't allow you to bring it back up for another year.
Right.
Just want to make that noted. Okay.
Any other comments for the public statement? Good. Thank you. Mr. Wadsworth, can you come back up to the podium, please? So again, kind of in this same position we were last month. Votes are a little different, obviously, with what it sounds like there's 4 against with 1 in favor.
Mhm.
You do have the option to table similar to the other applicant today, or if you'd like us to proceed with the decision based on what legal counsel said, the alteration in the code would allow you most likely to bring another request for a variance less than 1 year.
I'll go ahead and table it. And again, I think Zach said he might email me. I wasn't able to make the meeting last week because I was ill to see what the language of the new code is. So give me a chance to see that and talk to our city council rep actually and see where she thinks that might be headed. So I'll table this for now.
Okay, based on the applicant's request, do we have a motion to table?
Motion to table variance request 22-131V at, oh wait, sorry, that was the wrong one. 22-130V at 26240 Post Road.
Second, please.
Second.
Lawyer roll, please.
Mr. Garvin,
Yes.
Mr. Nye,
Yes.
Mr. Deschler,
Yes.
Mr. Murphy,
Yes.
Mr. Clower.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Wadsworth.
All right. Thank you all for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Do we have any communications, Tammy?
I do, and I even hesitate to ask this question, but we've had such a discussion with the board about meeting dates. And so this time of year, we're attempting to create meeting dates for the next calendar year. And October specifically has been a date and time that has been discussed. And so my question is, and I can't make promises, but my question is, our rules and regulations say we meet on the specific Thursday of the month. would the board, I don't think that we could not have a meeting in a complete month, but would the board wish for me to look at a different day?
I think next year you're okay because October 31st falls on a Tuesday, and based on the rules of the city, that's when the reason that October is difficult is because it falls on Baker's Night for those who have children. We want
Okay.
to spend that with our kids
Right.
or
of
be at
course.
home to see the other kids in the neighborhood.
Sure.
But this year it's on Monday. That's why we're all here tonight. It's on the 31st. And my understanding is that the city will make it on the 31st on a Tuesday as well. And next year it would be on a Tuesday. So I think we're okay leaving it that same week. And I know, obviously from a vacation perspective, when you send out the proposed list, people can give a preliminary evaluation of when they are or are not going to be able to make it. So
Thank you. And then the other point of conversation is council's going to be able to outline when they want to do the joint session that they had with all three boards and commissions. And we're going to try to identify that earlier to accommodate people's schedules as best possible. So that will be included when we bring meeting dates. We'll have that date, hopefully, for your consideration.
okay, great. Are you aware if we have any applications for December or November?
We do have a potential application. Nothing has been filed, but we've talked to a couple applicants.
Okay.
Solar applicants or?
No, a different subject.
Okay, great. Well, if there are no further questions or comments, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.